So good evening and welcome to Glasgow Loves the EU. This evening we're talking to Arvydas Grisinas. Arvydas is a political anthropologist who conducted fieldwork during the Maidan protests in 2014 in Ukraine. He's a researcher at Kaunas University of Technology who's written a book on post-Soviet political identity formation called Politics with the Human Face, Identity and Experience in Post-Soviet Europe. He's recently become an activist helping Ukrainians arriving in Lithuania escaping war. So welcome, Arvydas.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Great. And we've also got Bernd, who's helping on the IT, and we've got Paul, who'll be taking your questions on social media. So if you have any questions, just pop them into Facebook or Twitter. So good evening, Arvydas. And so can you tell us, first of all, how you became interested in politics?
Well, I would lie if I would say that I was always interested in politics. It actually fell upon me in some sense when I just out of curiosity tried to apply for a master's thesis at University of Kent, UK, and ended up in a PhD program in politics. But I was always interested in post-Soviet culture and the image, the notion of post-Soviet. So, I took this specific angle to politics, analyzing and looking at it as a result of culture rather than the other way around. So.
Well, that sounds really interesting. It's interesting that you say you ended up doing a PhD by accident.
Believe it or not. No, I did have a question. I had a question of how post-Soviet identities form. Okay, so the Union collapsed and all these little countries came out, right? So how do they define themselves? On what basis should we define ourselves, or can we define ourselves, being a citizen of Lithuania? That kind of intrigued me.
Yeah, obviously, it must have been a really interesting time with all these kind of new identities and nationalities springing up. Can you give us a synopsis of what led up to the Euromaidan protests?
Yes, well, I was thinking how long back in time should I go? But there have been tensions between pro-Western leaning population and pro-Russian population for quite a while, and we can mention the Orange Revolution, where the more pro-Western president was elected. But if we talk about the factual events or protests as such, they started when a group of youngsters protesting, young people, students, 18-year-olds and such, were protesting peacefully in this Maidan square. The sort of tricky or sleazy decision by then president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, to swap from this negotiation with the EU regarding its partnership agreement, and all of a sudden swapped to closer relations to Russia. And this, of course, caused an outrage, especially by the young generation. And they were protesting in this Maidan Square and were very harshly beaten by Berkut, the former police force, on a pretext that they need to build a Christmas tree for the festivities in that square. So they gathered those young people and beat them ruthlessly, leaving a tunnel to pass through, and hitting them as they ran. I was told this by one of the participants inside, who was in those protests. And so this sort of youth protest, so to say, all of a sudden overnight turned into a citywide protest when parents of these young people came out, and friends and grandparents came out to protest that type of repression, and all of a sudden, well, the story goes that about 1 million people went out to the streets, and in several places in central Kyiv, these sort of protester camps were established, including in the Maidan Square, but then it branched out into this Freedom Square, European Square, and took on a part of Khreshchatyk sort of avenue, which is one of the main streets in central Kyiv. So it branched out eventually. So this happened in November 2013, and I went to Kyiv to do field work because I saw a lot of visual information, visual symbolism, and visual culture that I was interested in. But I went there in February, on February 13th till 20th, so not that long of a visit. But on the 18th, these very important. Looking for a word, struggle or this fight between when Berkut was trying to break Maidan took place, and the protesters pushed back, and which eventually led to shootings of civilian protesters, and eventual departure to Russia by the ousted president.
I mean, it's shocking. If anybody's seen Winter of Fire, you should, you know what he's talking about. But if you haven't seen it, you should definitely watch it. It's absolutely shocking. So you said, so what made you go there? I mean, you were there as a kind of an independent observer. Was that part of your academic studies, or did you feel like you wanted to get involved in the protest, and did you live in the protest camp, or?
I was kind of neutral when I was going there. I just wanted to see what's happening there, and I was working on what I called political images. That is to say, these ideas that are popularly used in politics, and that have associative meanings and often visual representations. I looked at two in particular, at being right wing and being and the image of the West, and I wanted to understand what these concepts mean to the Ukrainians themselves, but then I also compared it to how the West project their notions of these categories up onto what's happening in Ukraine, and also how the Russian media was projecting that. And what what I was left with was this trinary image, trinary vision that is very. All three instances are very different amongst themselves. Yeah.
And what else did you witness when you were there, or did you ever feel like you were in danger yourself?
Outside Maidan more than inside, because when I was going there, there were reports of people being just caught by mafiosos, and or just people, let's say, dangerous people, taking them outside Kyiv into forests, and so various forms of repression, of course coordinated by the then president's sort of powers, but executed by informal characters that were eventually also called Titushki. And that's a separate story how that title came about, but it comes from one guy's surname, and that guy was this sporty chav type of person that that beat up a journalist, and his surname is Titushka. So those you could imagine these classic Gopnik, Slavic Gopnik meme type of characters that are being paid to terrorize protesters. So these people were going around and supporting and participating in anti-Maidan protests. So there was an image or a spectacle being created that there's a part of the population that actively oppose Maidan, even though, well, that's yet another story how that's organized and why and where. But when you're inside Maidan, which was protected by guards, but also by sandbags filled with snow, so not snow bags probably, and these walls. So it was Fortress Maidan in some sense. So inside there, it was super clean for a protester encampment. It was very orderly. The atmosphere was very friendly and caring. And I saw a couple of people that apparently had a little bit too much to drink, maybe, because alcohol was not allowed inside or not appreciated inside, so to say. So those people who were too drunk, they would be taken out and just left outside the walls of Maidan. So order and cleanliness was a political statement, because it was an effort to show that we don't want to live in a way that we did in Soviet times and in these Yanukovych's times and these post-Soviet times, where the entire state was basically held by politicized mafioso sort of figures, with corruption being foundational for organizational sort of system that spanned across the state. So you have these oligarchs and the arch oligarch on top, and everything is sort of everything's corrupt, and that's a norm. So that's especially the healthcare system that they were particularly disgusted by. So all of that was put in opposition to what they were trying to do in Maidan, as far as I saw. So I can, of course, only attest to what I saw. I wonder if I could show that picture, which kind of shows the opposition in their vision.
Yeah, sure, please do.
If that would clarify what I mean. So this is a picture of a picture. I went there and took a bunch of pictures of pictures. That's basically what I did for my fieldwork. But it shows a caricature, a kind of defined sort of conveyed what a lot of people I talked to there, who were, by the way, of various age groups, various professions, from businessmen to construction workers or whatnot, and of various coming to Kyiv from various parts of Ukraine. So it wasn't Western Ukrainian sort of protests. I talked to people from Nikolaev and from Kharkiv, and so they came from all over. And this is what they were telling me. They said, we want to live in a European way, how the Europeans do. That didn't mean they want to join the EU necessarily. What they wanted to do is, I think, Europe as a more of a spiritual, historical category, more of a way of life and civilizational path, which is clean, which has rules, which is orderly, and which has, of course, higher standards of living than the post-Soviet world. And on the other hand, you see a sign saying, welcome to Asia, with shots and blood and barbed wire and a Russian flag, and trash, death, alcoholism. So the problems that any post-Soviet society are all too familiar with, and to different extents, cope with it in different ways. The Soviet heritage, so to say.
And so where do you think that this image of Europe kind of comes from, that orderly and clean and, almost pure in a sense? Like what's the origin of that image or that impression that they have?
Sorry. My sense is that visually, even if it is not as ideal as they had imagined, I think the contrast, if you go, east of Ukraine and west of Ukraine, you just see the difference. But also, it's as I said, it was more about the idea, as far as I understand, the idea that life can have rules, that life can have principles, that you can have an orderly. So they talked about orderly life, and what they joked about was, they were making these Molotov cocktails, as famous Molotovs, and they joked that they're throwing Molotovs at the police, but they're throwing their cigarette butts in a trash can. So it's about this, effort to I don't know if purge yourself is the right word, but of cleaning yourself internally somehow. So they had a library of Maidan. They had a university of Maidan. They had so these spontaneously established institutions, and they had artists working there. They had shops open there. We were doing an interview with a couple of protesters in a cafe, and sort of standard Western styled hipster cafe, and we look through the window and people with balaclavas and shields and batons are walking past. It was a surreal celebratory atmosphere at first, because they had this long period of peace and negotiation before it all erupted. They were hoping they could reach some sort of agreement with the government, and when the government, or the Verkhovna Rada of the time, the parliament, ignored their own promise to debate suspending some of the rights of the president, sort of some of the powers of the president, then the patience broke of my darn protesters. So then they went to the streets. But before that, it did seem a little bit like a sort of a carnival, and some weren't happy about it because they what are we here to dance and sing, or are we here to change Ukraine? So there was a variety of reactions, is what I'm trying to say, I suppose, and a variety of ideologies, and a variety. It was in some sense a true Greek polis, a city-state inside a city. that was debating its future and that was negotiating its future and trying to define it and defending at the same time. So that's how I saw it, at least.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, it must have been so interesting to be there and just to witness all that firsthand. We'll just see if there's any questions from coming in from social media.
We don't have any questions yet, although somebody's mentioning the documentary you're talking about, Winch on Fire, which I just want to give another plug to because it's an amazing piece of filmmaking. I just wanted to ask about one of the things that portrays really well is just the scale of the brutality of the response from the States. And I just wondered whether, was that a complete shock or was it partially expected? Because from our, from point of view in the UK, it's just absolutely shocking.
Well, since you mentioned it, I'll share a couple of more pictures, which I saw on the street. So again, I'm taking pictures of pictures, but these are photographs by professional Ukrainian photographers. So I was just documenting that so that because this was, put out in a street so that people would know what's happening and, and there's the protester side of the story. Now, was it expected? Well, I think the protests themselves started off with Berkut, these police officers, which ended up forming the so-called Donbas Republic police force later. They hit those protesters with sticks, and the protests were beat up. So this is how it started. So I think people, if anyone had any illusions, I don't think they had many soon after. So elderly people. This is quite impressive. This one says medicina, medicine. Medyczna dopomoga, medical help. So, I mean, they were facing this. So, I'm not sure I even need to comment. They kind of, one more picture that I took. Can you see the bullets?
Yeah.
Yeah, these are, so what they did was these Cossacks, these again, people in Cossack outfits that were standing around there, they had made this board having gathered the bullets and shrapnel that was used against them from the streets. So the Berkut police would use flashbang and sound grenades, right? But they would wrap, let's say, metal pieces around it as shrapnel. So essentially, it becomes a frag grenade, and they would throw that at people. Iron bullets, Kalashnikov bullet. I mean, I imagine that, now when you talk of it, I remember that the violence increased with time, because so there were people shot, one then another, then they were declared heroes, and pictures of them were hung around, and but eventually, it all led to these mass fights, and even further when Berkut or not Berkut, snipers started shooting people with live ammunition. So my understanding is that this perception of violence, that capacity of violence by the police force kind of increased with time, and so whenever they thought that's it, I imagine Berkut surpassed itself.
It's absolutely just appalling. But can you kind of give us a summary of how the situation then came to a conclusion, and how it kind of led to the situation that's now in Ukraine? Do you think they're connected, or they had an influence on what's happening now?
Yeah, so the fighting between Berkut and the protesters took two nights, I would say. So from the 18th to the 19th, there was this major battle. Then it carried on through the 19th, and I believe the 20th. It kind of it was the 20th, if I remember correctly, that the shooting started. That the snipers were started shooting people, and eventually they pulled back. And on the 21st, Viktor Yanukovych left the country for Russia and remains there ever since. So afterwards. Of course, a new Poroshenko's government was elected, and people tried to cope with trauma. But very soon thereafter, Russia occupied Crimea. It presented it as an attack by these little green men and these unidentified militias that, of course, ended up overthrowing the government there, and then this fake referendum support, with the what's the word for someone who observers, international observers of various very, very dubious origins coming to observe that, and lots of far right activists and so on, and overall, this cloud of confusion that so this is when Russia starts very actively using its hybrid means, so disinformation campaigns and RT. I remember I'm coming back from Maidan, and what I see live, what I see there, and what I see on Russia Today are just two completely different pictures. Like there's nothing that RT is talking about. They show some clips of fighting. Yeah, they show some maybe some radicals from the part of Maidan, which there were, of course. Otherwise, who non-radical would start fighting, right? It's the first lines, right? But and then completely just pouring complete lies, just straight up lies, just lies. On top of that, and well, that's your post-truth reality. That's the heart of post-truth. So now, when we see from a perspective, we can kind of track the little Kremlin red or thin red line through everything that happened in the West ever since as well. But yeah, this was this sort of shock in the Western informational sphere, the confusion over what is happening, who's guilty, because Russia, of course, threw charges of neo-Nazism on Ukrainians, and accused Ukraine, Ukraine's new government of being this fascist neo-Nazi junta. I'm using these specific concepts because these all are images in political imaginaries of the West that have been manipulated, but also in Russia. They mean slightly different. A fascist, for instance, in Russian public culture means a Western opposition in general. it comes from the Soviet times, where and the mythology of the Second World War, and everything that the Western world puts forth against, let's say, Soviet Union, is titled fascist. So the Baltic states are also titled as nationalist juntas that are trying to somehow break away from this lovely place of USSR, and okay, so back to Ukraine. So eventually, what happens is similar overthrows or similar land grabs take place in the eastern part of Ukraine called Donbass, in two major cities, Luhansk and Donetsk, and they are declared as these republics, people's republics, that of course want to be friends with Russia and not Ukraine. And of course, the action is completely illegitimate, and a long simmering 8-year war starts, which has reached a crescendo now. So it's important to remember that the war started in 2014 when Russia attacked Ukraine in 2014. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's the brief synopsis.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're talking about the concept of Nazis there. It's literally like the opposite of what we would think of a Nazi is. It's interesting. But I just wanted to ask you, you're talking about disinformation there as well. Obviously, you're studying, Ukrainian identity. Obviously, there's a lot of solidarity there and unity amongst the Ukrainians, and bravery, obviously, as well. Like, do you think the disinformation affects their own identity, or do you think it actually makes them stronger?
Well, I mean, it was super powerful back in the day, back in 2014, 15, and so on. And a part of Ukrainian population truly believed Russian propaganda, predominantly for the same reason that we see such an obscure reaction by Russian population supporting this genocide, what can now probably be called genocide, maybe not legally and formally, but politically speaking, of course, because it is motivated with eradication of Ukrainian nation. But this people who support that watch the same box that people who were pro-Russian in Ukraine. So they watched the same channels. They watched Russian media and got their news from Russian media. A large part of them were Russian speakers. And of course, it's important to also mention that soon after the occupation of Crimea and this establishing of these separatist regions, Russia started giving out Russian passports to Ukrainian citizens, and creating a pretext for this new wave of aggression, which is supposedly defending its citizens again, right? So it's all fabricated, but it's fabricated in a systematic, long-term way. As well as in an improvised, on the spot type of way. But in terms of Ukrainian population, it was the difference was in opinions existed, and the eastern part of Ukraine were indeed much more pro-Russian than the West. Yet all changed when Russians destroyed Kharkiv, they destroyed Mariupol, Kherson. So cities that were predominantly Russian ethnically maybe, and Russian speaking, and really the cities that they expected to greet them with flowers. Well, they greet them with greeted them with in-laws and stingers, but that's better.
Yeah, it's just kind of, yeah, like inconceivable just watching it from the outside. I mean, it just is completely illogical, like in every level. But you were saying there before we started that you're actually working for the Red Cross in Lithuania. Can you tell us what you do with them?
Well, I'm basically volunteering as part of this preparation for extreme situations group. And so we get some more training compared to regular volunteers. And we opened up this registration center where in Lithuania, where various non-governmental organizations like Food Bank, Save the Children, Red Cross, and the migration, that's a national migration service, kind of banded together and created these reception centers, and we were kind of coordinating them. Now the Red Cross kind of has quite a lot of volunteer support, spontaneous volunteers, as we call it, who can take over these coordination functions even, and the process is running smoothly now. But yeah, that was my main prerogative. And individually, I simply tried to create communities, neighborhood-based communities in my city, Vilnius. I tried to have these people who arrive in a new country, in a new context, kind of come together, get a sense of emplacement, and get a sense of, I call them, neighbors by destiny. So the sense of neighborhood, and kind of to give them the tools, the fishing rod, so to say, to somehow stand up for and take care after themselves, because in the end Putin wants to destroy them, and you can fight. Putin wants bad things to happen to them, and we're trying to make good things happen to them. So it's an effort to fight even by just looking after yourself. So yeah. So these two areas right now.
That's incredible. That's very generous of you. That's brilliant. We'll just check if there's any questions on social media coming in.
I don't have any. No, sorry.
No, okay, no worries. Just you're talking about there everything you're doing with the Red Cross. Can I just ask if there's anything you think that we can do in the UK, like in a practical sense, like how can we help? Is there anything we can do at all? I mean, obviously there are issues with visas, and Ukrainians, coming into the Ukraine. Oh, sorry, coming into the UK. But is there anything else that we can do in a practical sense to help?
Well, I'm not very aware of how the UK is faring internally, accepting migrants or refugees. But I think UK has been one of the major allies and helpers to Ukraine in these difficult times. I'm unhappy and sad to say that some other countries weren't as understanding in this context. So I would say the UK should just continue what it's doing, and UK citizens should nudge their government to do that, because it is in the end the defense of democracy in Europe as such, of ideals that I think everyone in Europe and the UK can stand up to. It's just about having a free choice. It's about making your decisions for yourself. It's having a right to define your own future, not having some weird self-proclaimed imperial power dictate something on the premises of some weird historical narrative. So I mean, it's about the principles that the Western world stands for. And the thing is that Ukraine stands for that with great courage, with incredible superhuman courage. And just to support that is to, stand on the right side of history. So I think just to remind your government of that, to remind your government that it is doing the right thing, is all that needs to happen, I suppose.
Okay,
Because
thanks.
I mean, I can't comment on technicalities of military support. Military support, of course, super important, but but I'm not an expert on that, so I'll just.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks very much. And obviously, we'll be watching the situation very closely, and hopefully it won't be a protracted situation. But it's been really, really interesting to talk to you, and it's actually been fascinating to speak to someone who's actually there and who had first-hand experience. So thanks very much for talking to us this evening.
Well, thank you for having me, and I hope eventually we can have a discussion, or you can have a discussion on Ukraine in much happier terms. So
I hope so. Yeah. Thanks very much.